Invasion of Poland on September 1, 1939. The German Wehrmacht shattered the fragile peace of Europe by introducing Blitzkrieg, a lightning-fast symphony of destruction that redefined modern combat. This wasn't nearly an invasion. It was a mechanical predator orchestrated to paralyze an entire nation through speed and overwhelming fire superiority. While global military powers expected a repeat of the slow-moving trench warfare of 1914, Germany deployed 1.5 million men and 2,400 tanks, moving at a pace that defied conventional logic. The technical precision of this assault was bone-chilling. The Ju-87 Stupid dive bombers, equipped with wind-driven sirens known as Jericho trumpets, emitted a terrifying scream as they dived to deliver their payloads. This psychological warfare was designed to shatter the morale of polished defenders before the first bomb even touched the soil. Contrary to popular myth, the Polish army was not primitive. It possessed formidable assets like the 7-Japan tank and effective Bofors 37mm anti-tank guns. However, these localized strengths were rendered useless against the seamless coordination of the panzer divisions and the Luftwaffe. In just 35 days, a nation with a million-man army was systematically dismantled, proving that the era of traditional warfare had been permanently replaced by the age of the machine. Operation Market Garden in September 1944. The Allies attempted a daring lightning strike to end the war by Christmas, leading to the largest airborne operation in human history. The plan was a bold two-part masterpiece. Market involved dropping 34,876 paratroopers behind enemy lines, while Garden saw an armored spearhead racing to link them up. They aimed to seize a series of strategic bridges in the Netherlands, effectively outflanking the formidable Siegfried Line and opening a direct path into the heart of Germany. However, the shadow of disaster loomed due to a fatal cocktail of complacency and intelligence failures. Despite warnings of German Tiger I tanks in the area, Allied commanders pushed forward only to find the British 1st Airborne Division drop directly onto the 9th and 10th SS Panzer Divisions. This logistical nightmare left thousands of elite soldiers trapped in the cauldron of Arnhem, fighting with light weapons against heavy armor in a desperate struggle for survival. The result was a haunting lesson in military overreach. The Allies managed to capture several bridges, but the final crossing at Arnhem proved to be a bridge too far. By the end of the 9-day battle, the Allies suffered over 15,000 casualties, more than they had lost on D-Day itself. This crushing defeat didn't just stall the liberation of Europe, it shattered the illusion of an early victory and forced the world to brace for another brutal winter of blood and steel. Battle of France. By May 1940, the world watched in disbelief as France, a nation boasting one of the most powerful militaries on earth, collapsed in just 6 weeks. This was the ultimate masterstroke of German strategy, exploiting a fatal flaw in Allied thinking. While the French army placed its total faith in the Maginot Line, an impenetrable wall of concrete and steel, the German High Command executed the sickle-cut plan, a deceptive maneuver that bypassed the fortifications entirely. The true genius and terror of the German assault lay in the Ardennes forest, a region French generals dismissed as impassable for tanks. To their horror, German engineers cleared paths in record time, allowing 7 panzer divisions to pour through the gap like a tidal wave. This maneuver cut off the best British and French divisions in Belgium, forcing the chaotic but miraculous evacuation at Dunkirk. The speed was so intense that German tanks often outran their own supply lines, covering over 50 miles a day in a relentless pursuit. The psychological impact of this victory was perhaps more devastating than the military conquest itself. When Hitler stood in front of the Eiffel Tower for a victory, photo it signaled a global shift in the balance of power. France had fallen not due to a lack of bravery, but because its 19th century tactics were annihilated by 20th century synchronized warfare. This triumph proved that even the most formidable fortresses are useless if the enemy simply moves faster and smarter than you ever thought possible. Battle of the Bulge by December 1944. The Allied High Command believed the German army was a broken force, capable only of a slow retreat. They were wrong. In a desperate final throw of the dice, Hitler launched Operation Watch on the Rhine, striking through the frozen, heavily forested Ardennes, using the cover of thick winter fog to neutralize Allied air superiority. 200,000 German troops and 600 tanks smashed into a thinly held American line, creating a bulge in the front that threatened to reach the sea and cut the Allied armies in half. The situation turned dire at the strategic crossroads of Bastogne. Here, the 101st Airborne Division found itself completely surrounded, shivering in foxholes with zero winter gear and dwindling ammunition. When the Germans demanded a formal surrender, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe responded with a single legendary word: nuts. This defiant spirit held the line for days against relentless panzer assaults, until the weather cleared and Patton's Third Army broke through the siege. This confrontation stands as the bloodiest battle in American history, resulting in nearly 89,000 U.S. casualties. For Germany, the gamble was a logistical suicide mission. They burned through their last strategic reserves of fuel. By the time the bulge was flattened, in January 1945, the German army on the Western Front was completely spent, leaving the road to the Rhine wide open for the final Allied advance. Battle of Britain. After the fall of France in 1940, Great Britain stood as the land sentinel against the Nazi tide, leading to the first major campaign fought entirely in the air. Hitler's plan Operation Sea Lion required absolute air superiority before a single German boot could touch British foil. To achieve this, the German Luftwaffe unleashed a relentless onslaught of over 2,500 aircraft, aiming to annihilate the Royal Air Force, the RAF on the ground, and destroy the British will to resist through the terror of the Blitz. The British advantage lay not in numbers, but in a revolutionary secret weapon, the Chain Home Radar Network. This early warning system allowed RAF controllers to vector their Spitfire and Hurricane fighters with surgical precision, intercepting German bombers before they reached their targets. While the Luftwaffe pilots were exhausted by long flights over the Channel, British pilots could land, refuel, and be back in the air within minutes. Ultimately, the failure of the Luftwaffe to destroy the RAF proved to be Hitler's first major defeat. By September, realizing the cost was too high after losing over 1,700 aircraft, the invasion was postponed indefinitely. This victory ensured that Britain remained a sovereign aircraft carrier for the eventual liberation of Europe. As Churchill famously stated, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." Battle of Moscow by late 1941. The German war machine had reached the very doorstep of the Soviet capital, with some scouts reportedly spotting the golden spires of the Kremlin through their field glasses. The fall of the Soviet Union seemed inevitable, as the Wehrmacht stood just 15 to 20 miles from the city center. However, the German High Command had failed to account for a force more brutal than any army. General. Winter temperatures plummeted to a bone-chilling -40 degrees, causing engine oil to solidify like tar and German weaponry to jam. While thousands of soldiers suffered from severe frostbite in their thin summer uniforms, it is hard to imagine the sheer grit required to survive such a frozen hell. If you're finding these historical insights valuable, don't forget to like, Share and comment below with which battle you think was the ultimate turning point. Your engagement helps us keep the history alive. The tide turned when Soviet leadership made a high-stakes gamble, bringing in 18 elite winter-hardened divisions from Siberia. After intelligence confirmed Japan would not attack from the east, these fresh troops, equipped with skis and specialized submachine guns, launched a massive counter-offensive on December 5th that sent the frozen German lines reeling back. This clash involved over 7 million soldiers in total, making it one of the largest defensive successes in history. For the first time since 1939, the myth of Nazi invincibility was shattered as Hitler's forces were pushed back over 100 miles. Operation Barbarossa on June 22, 1941. The world witnessed the largest military invasion in human history, as Hitler tore up the Non-Aggression Pact to launch a crusade of annihilation. This was a conflict of unprecedented scale, involving a staggering 3 million German troops, 3,350 tanks, and 2,000 aircraft. Surging across a frontier stretching nearly 1,800 miles, the objective went beyond mere territorial conquest. It was an ideological war of extermination, designed to erase entire ethnicities and secure living space for the Reich. In the opening weeks, the speed of the German advance was terrifying, encircling and capturing hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers in massive cauldrons like Minsk and Kiev. Despite these catastrophic initial losses, the sheer vastness of the Soviet interior and the bottomless reserves of its manpower began to swallow the invaders whole. The German logistical system, designed for short European distances, crumbled under the weight of Russia's mud and primitive roads, leaving panzer divisions stranded without fuel. This operation opened the Eastern Front, a theater of war, so brutal that it would eventually claim the lives of 8 out of every 10 German soldiers killed in the entire war. Barbarossa was the ultimate turning point, where the war stopped being a series of quick campaigns and became a grinding war of attrition that Germany, despite its technical superiority, simply could not win in the long run. Battle of Berlin by April 1945. The Third Reich's collapse converged on its heart, turning the capital into a claustrophobic slaughterhouse. This was a raw war of vengeance, as 2.5 million Soviet troops, backed by 41,000 artillery pieces, unleashed a firestorm. The bombardment was so intense that on the first day, the Red Army fired more shells by weight than the total bombs dropped on London throughout the entire war. Inside the ruins, defense fell to exhausted Wehrmacht survivors and the Hitler Youth, children as young as 12, armed with Panzerfasts. Combat moved into a nightmare dimension. With hand-to-hand fighting in subway tunnels and bombed-out cellars, every street corner became a fortress, forcing the Soviets to use heavy howitzers at point-blank range to clear the path. The end arrived when the Soviet flag was raised over the Reichstag, while Hitler took his life in a concrete bunker. This final act saw nearly 100,000 German civilians perish in the crossfire. With Berlin's fall, the Nazi regime vanished into ash, bringing a bloody silence to a continent screaming for 6 long years. Operation Overlord on June 6, 1944. The Allies launched the largest seaborne invasion in history, a miracle involving 156,000 troops crossing the English Channel. This was built on Operation Fortitude, using inflatable tanks and fake signals to trick Hitler into expecting an attack at Partuala. The deception worked so well that German command hesitated for hours, convinced the Normandy landings were merely a diversion. The most terrifying moment occurred at Omaha Beach, where American divisions faced a literal wall of lead due to cloud cover. Preliminary bombings missed, leaving American soldiers to step off boats into the crossfire of MG-40. 2 machine guns, firing 1,200 rounds per minute for hours. The beach was a killing zone with no cover except the bodies of fallen comrades. Despite the chaos and 4,400 Allied dead by nightfall, bravery allowed soldiers to scale the bluffs and silence German batteries. Establishing this foothold opened the Western Front, creating a strategic nightmare for Germany. This victory forced the Reich into a lethal two-front fight, caught between the Soviet steamroller in the east and Allied industrial might in the west. Battle of Kursk by July 1943. The plains of Russia became the stage for the largest tank battle in human history. Hitler, desperate to regain the strategic initiative, launched Operation Citadel, pinning his hopes on the revolutionary technological edge of the new Tiger I and Panther tanks. However, the Soviets were no longer the disorganized force of 1941. Having intercepted German codes, they transformed the Kursk salient into a 50-mil deep fortress, bristling with over 1 million landmines and thousands of hidden anti-tank guns. The climax erupted at Pro-Eroka, where a staggering 1,500 tanks collided in a chaotic, swirling dust cloud of fire and diesel. Soviet T-34s charged at full speed to close the distance, negating the superior range of German guns and engaging in point-blank armored brawls. The sheer density of the combat was so intense that tanks frequently rammed one another, turning the battlefield into a graveyard of charred metal. By the time the smoke cleared, the Wehrmacht's armored backbone was shattered beyond repair. Germany lost over 500,000 men and 1,000 tanks, resources they could never hope to replace. As Allied factories outproduced them tenfold, Kursk was the definitive moment when the Panzer myth died, ensuring that for the remainder of the war, the German army would be continuously retreating toward its inevitable doom. Battle of Stalingrad. If war has a literal heart of darkness, it was Stalingrad, a city that became a monument to human endurance and collective agony. Between 1942 and 1943, what began as a strategic grab for oil fields devolved into a prestige-driven death match between Hitler and Stalin. This was Rotten Creek or Rat War, where the front line was measured not in miles, but in rooms and hallways. The carnage was so absolute that the average life expectancy for a fresh Soviet conscript arriving in the city was less than 24 hours. The turning point came with Operation Uranus, a brilliant Soviet PER movement that exploited the weak flanks held by German allies. In a matter of days, the once unstoppable German Sixth Army, some 300,000 elite soldiers, found themselves trapped in a frozen cauldron with no food and dwindling ammunition. Despite Geiring's promises, the lip bottle could only find a fraction of the necessary supplies, leaving Hitler's finest troops to starve and freeze in sub-zero temperatures amidst the rubble. As we witness the staggering scale of this sacrifice, it's clear why Stalingrad remains the most studied battle in history. If these historical deep dives fascinate you, please take a moment to like, share, and comment below with your thoughts. Your support is what allows us to keep bringing these stories to life. When Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus finally surrendered, the world knew the Nazi Empire was doomed. The statistics of this single battle are incomprehensible. Nearly 2 million total casualties, making it the bloodiest clash in the history of warfare. Stalingrad was the psychological and military graveyard of the Third Reich. It was here that the tide of the 20th century officially turned, beginning a relentless Soviet march that would not stop until the red flag waved over the ruins of Berlin.